I'm Chris Bryant, CCIE number 12933, and welcome to the first part of our look at route redistribution. It's an important topic on your CCNA exams and especially your CCNP exam, especially the BSCI exam, I should say, for the CCNP. And route redistribution is so common in today's networks, you really need to know the basics even if you are not studying for a certification exam. So a little something here for everybody. And right off the bat, I just want to demystify what route redistribution is. All it is the process of introducing routes to a routing protocol that the protocol would not know about otherwise. And I've got a practical lab here for you on a rack of Cisco routers that I'll bring up in a moment and show you exactly what I mean by that. Now these can be routes that are discovered by another protocol, or they could be static or directly connected routes. So it's important to keep in mind for route redistribution. When we bring up the lab here in a moment, actually I'll show you the lab that we're going to be using in this particular video series. We've got OSPF and RIP running, and route redistribution does not have to be from one dynamic routing protocol to another. We could have a static route that we want to redistribute into OSPF and or RIP here. We could have a directly connected route that we wanted to do. So while often it's going to be one dynamic routing protocol's routes being redistributed into another, you also need to put static and connected routes into a protocol, and we'll take a look at that later in this actual lab when you need to do that. So again, they can be dynamically discovered routes, they can be static routes, or they could be directly connected routes that you're redistributing. Now, route redistribution is not an all or nothing process. You can choose to redistribute certain routes or only one. And what I mean by that, and we'll see that again here in a moment in the lab, but you can have 4 static routes on a router. And let's say that in this case we want to redistribute one of them into one of the routing protocols running on that router. You can write an access list that indicates here's the route that I want to redistribute and just leave the other ones out. That's more of an advanced skill for CCNP and even CCIE lab work, but I will have a video for that on YouTube as well. But here we're going to keep it a little simpler and stay with the basics. And here's one thing I want to mention definitely for working with route redistribution with production networks. The larger the network, the more difficult route redistribution can be and the more dangerous it is. Now it sounds kind of dramatic, but improperly configured route redistribution can lead to routing loops. So it's just something we have to be careful about. Of course, in a home lab, if you end up with a routing loop or your redistribution doesn't work, that's actually good in a home lab because it's part of the learning experience. But we don't want to have that learning experience on a production network. So you've really got to be careful with your planning when it comes to route redistribution. Now, in this particular example with OSPF and RIP, you can see that I've got OSPF running over a segment between routers 1 and 3. The adjacency is already there. And I'm running RIP between routers 1 and 2 in this particular lab. Now the key is that with OSPF and RIP both running on router 1, will router 3 automatically know of any routes that are discovered by RIP and vice versa? Because what I've done is created loopbacks on routers 2 and 3 that are going to help us illustrate that point. So let's see what's going on router 1 by default. And we'll go down to router 2 first. Actually, I'll just show you what I've done. This is where loopbacks come in handy, especially in home labs. I've created 3 loopbacks that give me 3 separate networks to advertise. And here in RIP, what I've done is configured it. I've hard-coded it for version 2, and I've disabled auto summarization. So we'll go back up to router 1 and take a look at the RIP routing table only. And remember, you can do that with show IP route and then follow that with the kind of routes you want to see. And here you can see that we are seeing all 3 of those loopbacks. So far so good. Let's look at the entire routing table. And you can see the RIP routes right here in the middle. But we've also got 3 OSPF routes that are being learned from router 3. And we'll go down to router 3 and take a look. And again, great home lab stuff here. You can just create as many loopbacks as you want. You can create as many networks as you want. And there's our serial 1 interface. There's OSPF, and you'll notice that I've advertised those 3 loopbacks into OSPF, and router 1 was indeed seeing them. Show IP protocols, our first stop for any kind of verification or troubleshooting. And you can see this is what it looks like when you're running multiple protocols. It's just going to have one heading here for OSPF, and then another heading for the other protocol we're running, which is RIP in this point, and all the usual information we would expect. You'll see the timers there for RIP, and you'll see that I changed the default here as well to version 2 all the way around. So pretty much seeing what we expect there. And again, let's look at the entire routing table. We see the OSPF routes, we see the RIP routes, but are routers 2 and 3 going to see these routes? You know, there's no split horizon involved here or anything like that. So again, just as a reminder, because your routing table gets larger and larger and larger as time goes on, that you could put those little qualifiers, if you will, OSPF and RIP, on the end of the show IP route command. Let's go down to router 2. And you can see that router 2 doesn't see the loopbacks on router 3. It doesn't see the networks 1, 2, and 3. And router 3 by default is not going to see the loopbacks on router 2, because in this particular scenario there is no automatic route redistribution here between OSPF and RIP. So if we want router 3 to see the loopbacks on router 2 and vice versa, we're going to have to configure route redistribution on router 1. We're going to do that and discuss some reasons why we might not want to do that in the next part of this particular video series. I want to thank you for watching this video on route redistribution. Don't forget, you can always come out to www.thebryantadvantage.com. Over 250 free tutorials at last count, and a lot more to come. Videos, practice exams, all kinds of stuff. You can go straight to the tutorials page with that address I've put there. I'm Chris Bryant, CCIE number 12933, and I'll see you on the website.